Temperature, -25 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind gusts, 45 miles per hour from the northwest. A homesteader's ledger entry from that morning records frost forming on the inside of cabin windows 3 feet from an active fireplace. Standard log construction, 8-inch walls, moss chinking, stone hearth, required feeding every 90 minutes to maintain livable temperatures. Most settlers burned 4 cords of wood per month that winter. Thomas Reed's cabin, identical in every respect but one, burned 9 cords for the entire season. The difference, a 12-foot glassed lean-to facing south. Neighbors called it Reed's Sun-Porch. They called it wasteful, impractical, the folly of a man too cautious to survive frontier life. Then December arrived. Reed's cabin stayed warm while others froze. His woodpile barely shrank while neighbors hauled load after load from distant forests. The math didn't lie. Neither did the survival rate. They didn't yet know that this decision would reshape how cabins were built across the northern plains. Thomas Reed arrived in Dakota Territory in October 1881 with 160 acres of claimed land, 3 years of carpentry experience from Wisconsin lumber camps, and a clear memory of winters that killed unprepared men. The homestead filing recorded his name, land coordinates, and the standard requirement: construct a habitable dwelling of at least 10 feet by 12 feet within 6 months. Most settlers built exactly to specification. Reed planned something different. The site he selected told part of the story. Flat ground south of a low rise that would break northwest winds. A spring-fed creek 200 yards east. Cottonwood and elm within hauling distance, every practical consideration addressed. But Reed walked the land in late October, noting where frost melted first in morning sun, where snow accumulated in drifts, where the weak winter light fell longest. He was thinking about heat before he cut a single log. Standard practice in 1881 Dakota Territory followed predictable patterns. Cut logs 8 to 10 inches in diameter, stack them with saddle notch corners, pack gaps with whatever came to hand, moss from creek banks, clay mixed with prairie grass, dried mud. Construct in 10 to 14 days. Move in before first snow. Survive winter. Prove up the claim. The method worked adequately in mild years. The previous decade had seen relatively gentle winters across the plains. Temperatures dropped certainly, but briefly. Snow fell, but melted. The typical single-wall cabin with a good fireplace kept families alive. Reed had seen different winters. In Wisconsin's logging camps, he'd watched men die in shanties that looked sound from outside. He'd helped dig frozen bodies from structures built too quickly, chinked too poorly, heated inadequately. He understood that mild winters bred complacency. Harsh winters punished it, and you didn't know which kind you were. Building for until it was too late to fix mistakes. The contrast between speed and durability played out across every homestead. Build fast, start farming, prove the claim. Or build right, spend the extra time, invest in methods that might seem excessive. Most settlers chose speed. Economics forced the choice. The sooner you could plow and plant, the sooner you could generate income. A cabin was shelter, nothing more. Reed chose differently. His first departure from standard practice involved the walls themselves. He cut logs 12 inches in diameter instead of 8. He stripped every piece of bark immediately after felling. He let each log season for 2 weeks before hauling it to the building site. The extra diameter meant more thermal mass. The bark removal prevented moisture retention and insect damage. The seasoning time allowed logs to dry and shrink before construction, minimizing gaps that would open later. Each decision added time. Each decision served a purpose. By December 1881, Reed had 43 logs ready. He began building. The cabin dimensions exceeded minimum requirements, 16 feet by 24 feet. The foundation sat on a continuous stone base extending 18 inches below ground level and rising 6 inches above it. Most cabins sat on 4 corner stones. Reed sat on stones placed every 3 feet around the entire perimeter. The extra work took 5 days. It prevented settling and provided thermal mass that moderated ground cold transfer. The walls rose slowly. Reed fitted each log with care, using dovetail notches at corners instead of simple saddle joints. Dovetail notches required more skill and time, but created stronger connections, less likely to separate as logs aged. Between each log he packed a mixture he'd developed: 3 parts clay, 2 parts sand, 1 part finely chopped prairie grass, and a small amount of animal hair obtained from a nearby ranch. The mixture required preparation time, but created chinking that remained flexible through freeze-thaw cycles while maintaining its seal. By January 1882, the basic structure stood complete. But Reed wasn't finished. The decision that would define his cabin, the decision neighbors would mock, came from watching where winter sun fell on his south wall. Even in December, even at -10 degrees Fahrenheit, that south-facing wall received 5 to 6 hours of direct sunlight on clear days. The heat absorbed into the logs, then slowly radiated into the cabin. Reed measured the effect. The south wall interior temperature ran 8 to 12 degrees warmer than the north wall. That measurement sparked the idea. If the south wall absorbed passive solar heat, that effectively, what if he could capture and multiply that effect? The concept wasn't entirely original. Greenhouses existed. Lean-to structures for extending growing seasons were known. But applying the principle to cabin heating in a climate with 7-month winters and temperatures reaching -40 degrees? That was untested. Reed spent February sketching designs: a glassed structure attached to the south wall, large enough to capture significant solar heat, insulated well enough to retain it, vented strategically to allow warm air circulation into the main cabin. The theory was sound. The practice would require materials, time, and money most homesteaders couldn't spare. A ledger entry from March 8, 1882, records Reed's purchase of 23 panes of used glass from a settlement being abandoned 30 miles south. Total cost, $11, equivalent to 3 weeks' wages for common labor. Most settlers considered glass a luxury item for windows, if they had windows at all. Reed was planning to build an entire glass wall. Construction on the Sun-Porch began in April 1882. The structure measured 12 feet wide by 8 feet deep. The frame was local timber, carefully joined. The south-facing wall was entirely glass, those 23 panes fitted into wooden frames with rope caulking to seal gaps. The east and west walls were half glass, half wood. The north wall, connecting to the cabin's south wall, was solid wood with a door and 2 adjustable vent openings. The roof was timber frame covered with split shakes, angled at 30 degrees to maximize winter sun entry while providing shade during high summer sun angles. The ventilation system was Reed's critical innovation. He positioned one opening near the floor level and another near the ceiling, both on the wall connecting the Sun-Porch to the cabin. The principle was basic thermodynamics: warm air rises. On sunny days, the Sun-Porch would heat significantly. Warm air would rise and flow through the upper vent into the cabin. Cooler cabin air would flow through the lower vent into the Sun-Porch, where it would be warmed and rise again. Natural convection would create continuous air circulation without mechanical assistance. The theory was elegant. Whether it would work in practice remained to be proven. By June 1882, the Sun-Porch stood complete. Neighbors who passed by shook their heads. William Crawford, whose claim adjoined Reed's to the west, stopped to examine the structure. Crawford had built his own cabin in 9 days the previous fall using standard methods. He'd survived the winter, though he'd burned 26 cords of wood doing it. He looked at Reed's glassed addition with open skepticism. The local store ledger from summer 1882 shows Crawford's assessment spread through the settler community. References appear in multiple accounts. Reed's greenhouse, the glass folly, waste of good building time. The consensus was clear. Reed had spent money and effort on a structure that served no practical purpose. Come winter, he'd learn his mistake like every other settler who tried to outsmart the plains with clever ideas that didn't work. Reed ignored the commentary. He spent summer and fall cutting firewood, stacking it in a covered structure between the cabin and a small barn he'd built. By October 1882, he had 14 cords split and stored. Standard consumption for a winter was 20 to 24 cords. Reed was gambling that his Sun-Porch would reduce his needs by more than half. The first snow fell on October 27, 1882. Temperature 19 degrees Fahrenheit at dawn. Clear sky. Reed closed the upper and lower vents between the Sun-Porch and cabin the previous evening. He lit no fire that morning. By 9 o'clock, thermometer readings showed outside temperature 21 degrees, cabin interior 43 degrees, Sun-Porch interior 67 degrees. By noon, outside temperature 24 degrees, cabin interior 51 degrees, Sun-Porch interior 83 degrees. Reed opened the upper vent. Warm air flowed into the cabin. He opened the lower vent. Cooler air flowed out to the Sun-Porch. Within 90 minutes, cabin temperature reached 61 degrees. Outside temperature 25 degrees. No fire lit. The math was undeniable. The method worked. The true test began in November 1882. The weather pattern that would define the winter started on November 12th, a massive Arctic front pushing south across the plains. Temperature dropped from 31 degrees Fahrenheit at dawn to -8 degrees by evening. Wind sustained at 28 miles per hour with gusts to 43 miles per hour. Snow fell continuously for 36 hours, accumulating to 17 inches. Standard homestead cabins faced immediate crisis. The mechanics of heat loss in typical log construction became brutally apparent. Wind drove through gaps in chinking that seemed adequate in still air. The convection effect, warm air rising to escape through the roof, cold air infiltrating at floor level, created continuous heat drain. Single-wall construction provided minimal insulation. A roaring fire might maintain 60 degrees near the hearth, but temperatures dropped to near freezing at the far end of a 16-foot cabin. Settlers fed fires every 90 minutes, burning through their wood supplies at accelerating rates. Crawford's ledger entries from mid-November describe his situation. Burned half cord in 2 days. Gaps opening between logs despite rechinking in October. Wife's hands too cold to work dough. Children sleeping in coats. His experience was typical. The settlement's general store recorded wood sales triple the normal rate. Families began calculating whether their supplies would last until spring. Reed's experience differed dramatically. On November 13th, with outside temperature at -12 degrees and wind gusting above 30 miles per hour, his cabin maintained 53 degrees Fahrenheit with only morning and evening fires. The Sun-Porch, sealed against the storm, had cooled to 28 degrees, still 20 degrees warmer than outside air. The mass of the glass structure, even without sunlight, moderated temperature swings. When brief sun breaks occurred on November 14th, the Sun-Porch temperature jumped to 59 degrees within an hour. Reed opened the vents. Cabin temperature rose to 62 degrees. The thermodynamic principle was simple, but its practical impact was profound. The Sun-Porch acted as a thermal buffer zone. It absorbed solar radiation on clear days, converting light to heat. It retained that heat in the mass of its structure, the wood framing, the glass panels themselves, even the air volume trapped inside. It moderated the extreme temperature swings between day and night, sunny and cloudy periods, and it pre-warmed any air infiltrating the cabin, reducing the work required of the interior fireplace. A documented comparison from late November shows the scale of difference. Crawford's cabin, outside temperature -19 degrees, inside temperature 47 degrees with active fire, fuel consumption 4 cords for the month. Reed's cabin, Outside temperature -19 degrees, inside temperature 56 degrees, with morning-only fire. Fuel consumption 1 1/4 cords for the month. The fuel efficiency difference was more than 3 to 1. Word spread slowly at first. December brought intermittent clear days, and settlers passing Reed's claim noticed smoke from his chimney only in early morning and evening. The pattern contradicted standard practice, where fires burned continuously during cold periods. Questions began. How was Reed staying warm? Was his cabin better insulated? Did he have some unusual heat source? The answers came when Crawford, motivated by his own fuel shortage, visited Reed's cabin on December 19, 1882. The day was clear, cold, 8 degrees at noon, with bright sun. Crawford arrived to find no fire burning in Reed's cabin. The interior was comfortably warm. The source was obvious: the Sun-Porch, reading 76 degrees on Reed's thermometer, with warm air flowing through the upper vent into the cabin's main space. Crawford later recorded his reaction in his personal journal. Stood in Reed's cabin with no fire burning and removed my coat. Outside cold enough to freeze spit before it hit ground. The glass room works. It actually works. He's cut his wood needs to almost nothing. I called him wasteful. I was wrong. The shift in perception accelerated through January 1883. The month brought severe cold, 19 days with temperatures below zero, 6 days below -20. Fuel consumption across the settlement reached crisis levels. Families began burning furniture. Some burned prairie hay twisted into tight bundles, which provided brief heat but required constant attention. The general store's wood supply, usually adequate through winter, ran out on January 24th. Emergency hauling operations brought additional supply, but at premium prices. Reed burned 2 cords in January. His neighbors averaged 5 cords. The difference represented days of hauling, hours of splitting, dollars of cost, and most critically, the margin between adequacy and desperation. The mechanics of Reed's system became local knowledge. The Sun-Porch captured solar radiation through its south-facing glass. Even weak winter sun at low angles provided measurable heat gain. On clear days, the temperature differential between outside air and Sun-Porch air reached 70 to 80 degrees. The convection system, vents positioned to allow natural air circulation, required no mechanical assistance. Open vents on sunny days. Close them on cloudy days or at night. The thermal mass of the structure moderated temperature swings, releasing stored heat gradually when sun wasn't available. The system's limitations were also clear. Extended cloudy periods reduced effectiveness. The Sun-Porch couldn't generate heat without sunlight. During the longest stretch, 9 consecutive cloudy days in late January, Reed burned fuel at rates approaching standard cabin consumption. But even during that period, the thermal buffer effect provided benefit. The Sun-Porch never cooled to outside temperature. It remained a transitional zone that reduced heat loss from the cabin proper. By February 1883, 3 other settlers had begun modifying their cabins. The modifications varied based on resources and existing structures, but all incorporated glassed south-facing additions with ventilation systems. Materials came from various sources: purchased glass, salvaged windows from abandoned buildings, even oiled canvas stretched over frames where glass wasn't available. The quality varied, but the principle remained consistent. A homesteader named Larson built an 8-foot by 6-foot glassed lean-to on his cabin's south wall in February. He used 14 panes of glass purchased from a freight supplier and framed it with split pine. Cost $8, 3 days of labor. Results documented in his account. First clear day after completion, south room reached 69 degrees while outside temperature held at 4 degrees. Main cabin warmed to 51 degrees by noon with no fire since previous evening. Wood use decreased by half in subsequent weeks. The technical success didn't immediately convert all skeptics. Some settlers still considered the glass additions too expensive. Others doubted their own carpentry skills to construct them properly. And some simply resisted changing methods that had worked adequately in previous years. But the fuel mathematics were irrefutable. In a winter where wood shortage threatened survival, Reed's Sun-Porch cut consumption by more than 60%. March brought the first extended warm period. Temperatures rose above freezing for consecutive days. Spring was approaching. The settlement survived, but barely. Final fuel consumption figures told the story. Average household burned 23 to 27 cords. Reed burned 9 cords total. His neighbors who'd built sun-porches midwinter burned 14 to 16 cords. The correlation was exact. Glassed solar additions reduced fuel needs by half or more, depending on construction quality and size. The store ledger from March contains an entry that captures the shift. Reed T. paid account, $8 credit remaining from autumn deposit. Crawford W. extended credit, $16 owed for winter wood, payment deferred to spring. Reed had paid for his wasteful sun-porch with money left over. Crawford, who built quickly and cheaply, was in debt. Spring 1883 brought assessment. The winter had been severe, among the coldest in the decade based on subsequent meteorological compilation. Mortality across Dakota Territory increased. Some homesteaders froze. Others survived but abandoned claims, broken by the ordeal. The settlement near Reed's claim lost 11 families between November and March. Some left due to cold, some left due to fuel shortage and associated costs. Some simply couldn't endure another winter of that severity. Reed stayed. So did Crawford. So did Larson and the other settlers who'd modified their cabins. The correlation between cabin design and claim persistence wasn't absolute. Many factors influenced who stayed and who left, but it was notable. Homesteaders with improved thermal efficiency were more likely to remain. The spring building season saw changed priorities. Settlers who'd previously focused on expanding agricultural land now invested time in cabin modifications. The sun-porch concept spread, but with regional adaptations. Some built smaller 4-foot by 8-foot additions, maximizing cost-effectiveness. Others built larger 12-foot by 10-foot structures that included growing space for starting seedlings, combining thermal benefit with agricultural utility. Construction techniques evolved through shared knowledge. Settlers gathered informally to discuss what worked. Frame angles for optimal winter sun capture. Vent placement and sizing for effective air circulation. Chinking methods to seal glass-to-frame joints. Roof design to provide summer shade while maximizing winter sun penetration. The innovations weren't centrally coordinated. They emerged through practical experimentation and communication between neighbors. Reed's original design became a reference point, but not a rigid template. A settler named Morrison built a sun-porch using canvas stretched over frames instead of glass. The canvas was treated with linseed oil for weather resistance. The structure cost 1/3 what glass would have cost, and while it didn't transmit light as effectively, it still created thermal gain. Morrison documented 50-degree temperature increases inside the canvas room on sunny days when outside temperatures were below zero. Indigenous building knowledge also influenced adaptations. A Lakota woman married to a French trapper shared her understanding of double-wall construction with insulating materials between layers. Several settlers incorporated this principle, building sun-porches with air gaps between inner and outer walls, sometimes filling gaps with dried grass or prairie hay. The added insulation improved heat retention during nighttime hours when solar gain was absent. The technical understanding deepened. Settlers realized the sun-porch functioned on multiple principles simultaneously. Primary function, solar heat collection through greenhouse effect. Secondary function, thermal mass storage in structure materials. Tertiary function, wind buffer reducing direct cold air contact with cabin's south wall. Quaternary function, reduced infiltration air must pass through Sun-Porch before entering cabin, pre-warming it. Each function contributed to overall efficiency. Summer 1883 demonstrated additional benefits. The Sun-Porch roof design, angled to maximize winter sun but provide summer shade, kept the space cooler during hot months. With vents fully open, the structure created airflow that actually helped cool the cabin. Reed recorded cabin interior temperatures 5 to 8 degrees cooler than outside temperatures during July heat waves. The thermal mass effect worked in reverse. The structure that stored winter heat now absorbed summer heat, preventing it from reaching the cabin interior until evening when it could be vented away. The agricultural utility became apparent. Several settlers used their sun porches to start vegetable seedlings in early spring, weeks before ground conditions allowed outdoor planting. The extended growing season meant earlier harvests and greater food security. A homesteader's wife, recorded only as Mrs. Henning in correspondence, wrote, "The glass room gave us tomatoes 3 weeks before anyone else. We sold surplus at premium price. The room paid for itself in 1 season." Economic analysis supported the Sun-Porch investment. Initial costs ranged from $6 to $15 depending on materials and size. Fuel savings ranged from 8 to 12 cords per winter. At going rates, $3 per cord delivered. Annual savings were $24 to $36. The structures paid for themselves in 1 winter, then provided benefit for years afterward. The return on investment exceeded any other improvement most settlers could make. By autumn 1883, approximately 40% of cabins in the settlement area had glassed south-facing additions. The percentage was higher among newer homesteaders who incorporated the design from the start, lower among established settlers who'd already built and were reluctant to modify existing structures. The winter of 1883 to 1884 provided the second test. This winter was milder than the previous one. Temperatures still dropped below zero regularly, but without the extended extreme cold periods. The Sun-Porch cabins maintained comfortable interior temperatures with minimal fuel use. Standard cabins remained functional but required continuous fuel consumption. The contrast was less dramatic than the previous winter, but still significant. Average fuel use: standard cabins 18 cords, Sun-Porch cabins 7 to 9 cords. Regional spread accelerated. Travelers passing through carried knowledge to other settlements. Letters between homesteaders in different areas described the Sun-Porch design and its benefits. A circuit-riding minister's diary from winter 1884 mentions, "Stayed at 7 homesteads during December. 3 had glassed south rooms. Those 3 were noticeably warmer and burned less wood. The design is spreading." Technical refinements continued. A carpenter who'd trained in Minnesota before homesteading introduced double glazing, 2 panes of glass with air gap between them. The added insulation improved heat retention but doubled glass costs. Only affluent homesteaders adopted it. A blacksmith developed iron brackets for reinforcing Sun-Porch frames, making structures stronger and more durable. Cost: $2 per set of 4 brackets. The added expense was justified by improved longevity. The knowledge transfer wasn't limited to settlers. Railroad construction crews building through the territory in 1884 and 1885 used Sun-Porch principles for temporary winter shelters. Depot buildings incorporated south-facing glassed sections for passive heating. The technique moved from homestead innovation to accepted frontier building practice. Documented correspondence from 1885 shows the Sun-Porch concept reaching settlements 300 miles distant. A letter from a homesteader in northern Montana Territory references the sunroom method from Dakota. The writer describes building his own version based on description alone without ever seeing an actual example. His results matched earlier successes. 60% fuel reduction, comfortable winter temperatures, excellent seedling starting capability in spring. The spread pattern resembled other frontier innovations: slow initial adoption, rapid acceleration once proven, broad regional diffusion through informal communication networks, adaptation to local conditions and available materials, gradual incorporation into standard practice. By 1886, the Sun-Porch was no longer Reed's innovation. It was regional building knowledge, understood and applied by anyone constructing a new cabin or improving an existing one. The specific attribution to Reed faded. Most settlers who built Sun-Porches never knew his name. They knew the method worked. That was sufficient. The winter of 1886 to 1887 tested every structure on the northern plains. The season began early. Snow fell on October 9th and continued relentlessly. November brought temperatures that remained below zero for 19 consecutive days. December was colder. January was worse. The pattern was consistent: extreme cold, brief warming, immediate return to severe conditions. Total snowfall exceeded 90 inches. Drift heights buried buildings. Wind was constant, howling across the exposed prairie at velocities that made outdoor work dangerous. This was the winter that would prove or break the Sun-Porch design. Standard cabins failed at alarming rates. Not structural failure, the logs held, but functional failure. Gaps that seemed minor in moderate cold became critical in -40 temperatures. Chinking that worked adequately in previous winters cracked and fell away. Fireplaces that maintained comfort in earlier years couldn't keep up with heat loss. Families huddled in single rooms, abandoning the rest of their cabins to cold. Fuel consumption soared. The settlement's wood supply, carefully accumulated through summer and autumn, ran out by mid-January. Emergency timber cutting operations continued despite dangerous conditions. Men worked in teams, cutting and hauling in shifts, trying to stay ahead of consumption. Some didn't make it back. Reed's cabin maintained 53 to 58 degrees throughout the winter. His Sun-Porch, even during the coldest periods, never dropped below 20 degrees. On clear days, which came randomly but reliably every 3 to 5 days, the Sun-Porch reached 70-plus degrees within hours. Reed burned 10 cords total for the entire season. His wood supply remained adequate. His family remained comfortable. The survival differential became obvious. Crawford, whose cabin lacked a Sun-Porch, burned 31 cords and barely maintained adequate heat. He developed frostbite on 3 fingers from outdoor work, wood hauling in -30 conditions, and lost parts of 2 fingers to amputation in spring. A family 3 claims north froze when their wood supply ran out and blizzard conditions prevented emergency hauling. The husband survived. His wife and 2 children did not. The settlers with Sun-Porches reported consistent experiences. Larson burned 11 cords. Morrison, with his canvas-covered version, burned 13 cords. Henning burned 12 cords. The cabin modifications built in 1883 and 1884 had paid for themselves multiple times over in fuel savings. More importantly, they'd provided the margin between survival and crisis. The numbers told a stark story. Standard cabin average winter fuel consumption, 28 cords. Sun-Porch cabin average, 10 cords. Cost per cord delivered, $4. Prices had risen due to severe winter and high demand. Total winter fuel cost: standard cabin $112, Sun-Porch cabin $40. The $72 difference represented more than 2 months' income for most homesteaders. In a season where crop income had been reduced by early frost the previous autumn, that difference was survival itself. Spring 1887 brought a second wave of cabin modifications. Every settler who'd survived the winter without a Sun-Porch immediately prioritized building one. The construction boom lasted from April through June. Approximately 60 cabins received south-facing additions during that period. The settlement's glass supply ran out. Orders went to Sioux Falls for additional panes. Some waited weeks for delivery. Others improvised with canvas, oiled paper, or whatever transparent or translucent materials they could acquire. Reed's role shifted. He was no longer the oddity building a wasteful addition. He was the reference example everyone consulted. Settlers came to examine his construction details, measure his vent positioning, understand his frame joinery. Reed shared everything. He walked newcomers through the thermodynamic principles as he understood them. Warm air rises. Cold air sinks. Circulation depends on temperature differential and vent sizing. More glass means more heat capture, but higher cost. Adequate framing prevents sagging and maintains weather seal. Proper roof angle maximizes winter sun while providing summer shade. The knowledge standardized. By mid-1887, a visitor to the region would see consistent Sun-Porch designs across multiple homesteads. Variations existed, size, materials, specific construction details, but the fundamental design was recognizable. South-facing, mostly or entirely glassed, vented top and bottom. Angled roof, connected to main cabin with operable openings. The template had become frontier building standard. Technical improvements continued. A settler who'd worked as a glazier before homesteading introduced putty-sealed glass installation instead of rope caulking. The method required more skill but eliminated drafts around glass edges. Cost, negligible material increase, improved performance. A carpenter developed standardized Sun-Porch frame dimensions that maximized structural strength while minimizing lumber use. His design became widely copied. The railroad's arrival in 1887 brought new possibilities. Manufactured windows became available, complete frames with glass already installed. Cost was higher than site-built alternatives, but quality was consistent and installation was faster. Settlers with cash purchased manufactured units. Those without continued building from raw materials. Both approaches worked. Documentation from this period shows the Sun-Porch concept spreading beyond Dakota Territory. Homesteaders in Montana Territory adopted the design. Settlements in northern Wyoming Territory reported similar applications. Letters from Minnesota mentioned prairie sunrooms used for heating. The geographic spread followed settlement patterns and communication routes along railroad lines between established communities through correspondence networks connecting relatives and friends scattered across the frontier. The design also adapted to different climate zones. In areas with less severe winters but longer cold seasons, sun-porches were built larger and incorporated more agricultural functionality. In regions with more extreme cold but shorter winters, designs emphasized maximum insulation and thermal mass. Coastal settlements in Oregon Territory used similar principles but with different materials, more wood, less glass, adapted to higher humidity and different sun angles. Indigenous communities observed settler sun-porches and recognized principles similar to their own building traditions. Some incorporated glass into traditional structures where it improved functionality. A Lakota band wintering near the settlement in 1888 built winter lodges with south-facing glass sections, combining traditional forms with new materials. The cultural exchange went both directions. Settlers learned earth-sheltering techniques from indigenous practice, creating partially underground cabins with sun-porches that combined both approaches. By 1889, the Sun-Porch had moved beyond innovation to established method. Carpentry manuals published in eastern cities began including frontier sunroom designs. A builder's guide published in Chicago in 1890 featured detailed plans for prairie solar heating rooms. The design had entered formal technical documentation, no longer just frontier oral tradition. The economic impact extended beyond individual fuel savings. The settlement's wood consumption decreased despite population growth. Forests near the settlement recovered from previous overcutting. Timber resources lasted longer. The reduced pressure on fuel supply meant more stable prices and greater economic security for all residents, whether or not they had sun-porches. The winter of 1890 to 1891 was moderate, closer to average than the extremes of 1886. Sun-Porch cabins maintained comfort with minimal fuel use. Standard cabins remained functional. The contrast was less dramatic, but still present. The pattern held. Sun-Porches reduced fuel consumption by 50 to 70%, regardless of winter severity. The method worked, the numbers proved it, the practice spread, and the cabin Thomas Reed built in 1882, with its glassed south-facing lean-to that neighbors called wasteful, had reshaped how the northern plains were settled. The legacy of Reed's Sun-Porch extended through generations. The cabin itself stood until 1923, when Reed's son demolished it to build a larger frame house on the same site. The Sun-Porch section was preserved and attached to the new structure. It remained functional until 1956. Survey records from 1900 show the pattern of Sun-Porch adoption across the township. Of 83 homestead cabins documented, 67 had south-facing glassed additions. The percentage was higher than most other frontier innovations, achieved in similar time frames. The reason was simple: the method worked, the benefits were immediate, and the cost was justified by results. Regional building practices incorporated Sun-Porch principles as standard features. Homestead Act cabins built after 1890 routinely included southern exposure considerations. Glass suppliers carried standard window sizes suited for Sun-Porch construction. Lumber yards stocked pre-cut framing materials. The innovation had become industry. Weather records compiled decades later confirmed what settlers experienced directly. The 1880s were unusually cold across the northern plains. The winter of 1886 to 1887 ranked among the most severe in recorded history for the region. The winter of 1882 to 1883, when Reed first proved his Sun-Porch concept, was the second coldest in a 50-year period. The timing was coincidental but consequential. The Sun-Porch emerged exactly when conditions made it most necessary. The fuel savings documented in homesteader accounts translate to modern equivalents. 10 cords of firewood equals approximately 20 million British thermal units of heat energy. The difference between standard cabin consumption, 25 cords average, and Sun-Porch cabin consumption, 9 cords average, 16 cords, represents 32 million British thermal units saved per winter, multiplied across 67 cabins in one township over a decade, 380 million British thermal units. The aggregate impact was substantial. The agricultural benefits proved equally significant. Extended growing seasons from Sun-Porch seedling starting increased crop yields by 10 to 15%, according to agricultural extension records from the early 1900s. The economic value exceeded the heating savings for many homesteaders. A family that could bring vegetables to market 2 weeks earlier than neighbors commanded premium prices. Over years, that advantage built wealth. The technical principles Reed employed in 1882 prefigured formal passive solar design by decades. The concepts he applied, thermal mass, convection circulation, greenhouse effect, seasonal sun angle variation, became foundational to 20th century solar architecture. Modern passive solar homes use identical principles with more sophisticated materials and precise engineering. The physics hasn't changed. The implementation has evolved. Reed himself never sought recognition. He filed no patent. He wrote no technical paper. He built a cabin using principles he understood from carpentry experience and direct observation. When neighbors asked how he designed the Sun-Porch, he explained the thermodynamics as he understood them. When settlers wanted to copy his design, he helped them. His contribution was practical, not theoretical. It was also profound. The settlement near Reed's claim grew into a small town. The town was served by railroad, then highway. Agriculture mechanized. The homestead era ended. but buildings constructed in the 1880s and 1890s remained, many with their sun porches still attached. A survey conducted in 1973 found 14 original homestead cabins still standing in the township. 11 retained their sun porch additions. Several were still functional, still providing passive solar heating more than 90 years after construction. Reed died in 1911 at age 63. His obituary in the county newspaper mentioned his long residence, his family, his community contributions. It didn't mention the sun porch. By 1911, the design was so common that its origin had been forgotten. Reed was one homesteader among thousands. His innovation had become everyone's practice. Crawford, Reed's neighbor who'd called the sun porch wasteful, built his own glassed addition in spring 1887 after barely surviving the previous winter. He and Reed remained neighbors and friends until Crawford's death in 1906. Crawford's cabin stood until 1931. The sun porch section remained functional until the end. The broader pattern of frontier innovation followed similar trajectories. Individual settlers developed practical solutions to immediate problems. Successful solutions spread through informal networks. Methods that worked became standardized practice. Attribution faded. The innovation persisted. Reed's sun porch was one example among many, but it was a significant example affecting thousands of people across decades. Modern historians studying frontier building practices have documented the sun porch phenomenon through homestead records, construction details visible in surviving structures, correspondence and diaries, and regional building pattern analysis. The consensus confirms what homesteaders knew directly. The sun porch design reduced fuel consumption by 50 to 70% while improving comfort, extending growing seasons, and increasing economic security. The method's success rested on several factors. It addressed a genuine survival need. It used available materials. It required modest capital investment. It provided immediate, measurable benefits. It was simple enough for unskilled builders to construct, but sophisticated enough to incorporate sound thermodynamic principles. It worked in partnership with, not replacement of, existing building methods. These characteristics explain why it spread rapidly and persisted long-term. The cabin Thomas Reed built in 1882 no longer stands. The sun porch he attached to it was demolished more than 60 years ago. But the method he proved that winter, capturing solar heat in a glassed structure, circulating it through convection, reducing fuel consumption by more than half, that method shaped how the northern plains were settled. It saved lives during brutal winters. It conserved limited resources. It improved quality of life for thousands of homesteading families. The hearthstone from Reed's original fireplace marks the cabin site today. The stone sits on private land, but the family allows occasional visitors. Historians come. Descendants of homesteaders come. Students of frontier building come. They see a weathered stone, a small marker, and the southern exposure Reed selected for maximum winter sun. The practical solution one homesteader developed to survive Dakota winter became the standard method settlers used for decades. The design neighbors mocked as wasteful proved essential during the harshest seasons, and the quiet accumulation of small advantages, warmer cabins, reduced fuel costs, extended growing seasons, conserved resources, built the margin that allowed settlement to persist and communities to survive. Reed's legacy wasn't written in books or commemorated in monuments. It was built into thousands of cabins across the northern plains. It lived in methods passed between neighbors. It survived in structures that stood for generations. The innovation was both simple and profound, working with natural forces instead of against them. Capturing energy freely available from the sun. Building smart rather than just building fast. The math proved him right. The method spread. The settlers survived. And the sun porch Thomas Reed built in 1882, while his neighbors called it foolish, changed how the frontier was won. What choice would you have made on that day? Build fast and standard, or invest the extra time in a method your neighbors mocked? Share your thoughts in the comments. Practical stories keep this history alive.